Today's episode is brought to you by the Green Man Group, a European investment and operations group investing in and operating the essential sustainable assets for our future. The Green Man Group focuses on three pillars: sustainable investing, real assets such as real estate and agriculture, as well as green energy infrastructure. What makes the group unique is its integrated model. It doesn't just finance these assets through its network of businesses, it builds, manages and optimises its pillars for the long term. This approach is designed to create durable value from the ground up. To learn more about investing in or being involved in the real assets shaping a sustainable future, you can visit the Green Man Group's website at thegreenman.group. Hello and welcome to Part to Part. Different guests this week. We've put together a new combination of two people you'll be familiar with, particularly if you listen to the subscription editions, Larry Donnelly and Brendan Ogle. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Great to be here.
See, Brendan, I do listen to you because you actually had said to me recently, put me on with Larry, I'll sort Larry out. So here you are now. What does he need sorting out about?
Matt, I've never doubted you listening to me. It's my ability to influence you that has caused me all these decades of pain.
So why do you want to get on with Larry?
Well, I follow Larry. It's great to meet Larry. I follow Larry from afar.
Via
across
social media?
Up until I left it recently. I couldn't just put up with Elon Musk anymore. But Larry was one of the reasons why maybe I hung around so long. Because I found his insights, while I would maybe disagree with many of them in some respects, thoughtful from a United States point of view, from an American point of view. Obviously, Larry's Irish American. Very, very, very thoughtful and provocative to me and to others, but in the best possible way. And I kind of tried a few times to provoke him back. To maybe looking at things a little bit differently. Maybe, I suppose the one issue that I would have some frustration with, not just with Larry, but with the debate across the pond, as it were, is this impulse that there seems to be for us in Europe and in Ireland, but in Europe more generally, to try to figure out how we deal with Trump. That kind of is a conversation that kind of infuses everything. Whereas I think it's the wrong conversation.
In what way?
I think the Americans need to figure out how to deal with Trump. I think it's beyond us dealing with Trump. I think America's gone. I think Trump has brought America away from the international order. And I think the rest of us, the rest of the world, certainly Europe, has slowly woken up to that fact. I think that's playing itself out at the moment in Iran and other places. And I think that's really sad, by the way. Don't celebrate that for one moment. I think it's also really dangerous, but I don't think there's anything we can do on St. Patrick's Day or any other day, and we'll come back to that, I'm sure, to stop that situation. And I think, I hope, I don't see much evidence of it, but I hope within the United States itself, politically or constitutionally, or with the Senate, the House of Representatives, with the Supreme Court, but just ordinary people, ordinary decent people, and America's full of them, let's be honest about it. They're not all represented by what's in the White House. Can pull it back before it's too late.
Well, just to say at the outset, I too have a lot of time for Brendan. We disagree on a lot, but I think Brendan would probably be surprised that we agree on a lot of things as well. The one point I'd make in response to what Brendan said, and this is something I keep saying, is that Donald Trump has not brought the United States to this point. The sad reality is, for a lot of factors I think Brendan would acknowledge, the American model is broken. And Donald Trump is not the cause of all that's affecting America. He's merely a symptom thereof. He's a symptom of the prevalent desperation, of a sense that our best days are behind it. Donald Trump played to that very, very well. If you look at recent presidencies, right, you had Barack Obama, who played to hope. Hope and fear are the strongest emotions in electoral politics. Barack Obama played to the hope that was out there. He let a lot of people down. He had some triumphs, but he let a lot of people down. That opened the door for Trump the first time around. Trump pushed too far. COVID happened. We had Biden as a comeback. But now, again, Trump was able to get to the top of the mountain because of a lot of different issues around there. We can talk the politics of it, and I'm constantly talking about the politics and all the details of the Democratic Party. But the reality is the fundamentals in the United States are still broken, and that is the deep problem.
Okay, look, I don't want to turn this into Pat to Power America. I am conscious that that is something separate, but it does raise the question of how Ireland interacts with the United States of America, given the way that that country is going. And this is something that on the subscription editions, the one we did with Marion last Wednesday, there's one with Dan O'Brien for next Sunday, that we have discussed a bit, but I do want to discuss it with you because clearly Micheál Martin went to the Oval Office last Tuesday, very much cognizant of the fact that we have this enormous trading and investment relationship with the United States of America. Leave aside the cultural thing, but it seems that what Micheál Martin decided to do was that he was not going to upset the President of the United States in any way, because to do so would be to maybe risk tariffs or risk Trump putting pressure on those who have already invested in Ireland to divest, to persuade those in America who might be thinking of Ireland not to come here in the future. So, Brendan, did you admire the pragmatism shown by Micheál Martin? Or would you be with those who think that he missed an opportunity to speak truth to power, to speak up and say, Ireland deplores what you're doing in Iran and what you're doing in other places. We disagree with you deciding unilaterally to start going killing people.
I wouldn't attach myself to any of those two polarities, Matt. First of all, I understand why he was there. I understand what foreign direct investment is. I understand how important it is to our economy, to jobs, to our tax revenues. And I do see and I do read that all the people who spent decades encouraging us to build an economy based on exactly that are now pointing out to us how precarious that economy is. Now that Trump is in the White House, and as Larry puts it, America is broken. But what I seen, I'm more interested in what I seen on Tuesday than what I heard. What I seen was an American president sitting on a world stage. I imagine if I was in Iran, I imagine if I was in Saudi Arabia, if I was in Qatar, if I was in the UAE or anywhere else, and I'm wondering, am I going to get bombed that night? And I'm seeing the American president lying into a camera about a nuclear threat that his own security personnel say does not exist. And lying for half an hour, abusing his former allies, insulting people. And I'm seeing this framed by the Irish flag, a bowl of shamrock, and our Taoiseach sitting there, and both of them wearing green ties. And that's the price we pay for foreign direct investment and for building an economy based around that. So I understand how important it is to us. I just recoil from an unspoken presumption that we don't pay a price for that. We do pay a price for it. And we pay it on St. Patrick's Day when we go to somebody like Trump and when we provide to him the stage on that day. Because people put on their TVs around the world and they want to know, as I say, what's going to happen tonight, what's going to happen in Tel Aviv tonight, what's going to happen in Tehran tonight. And that's what they see that day. So I think it's really sad. We can talk a lot about what Micheál Martin said, and he didn't say. He said some things good. He said some things not so good. He could have been stronger on some things. He could have maybe sat out some things. He defended Starmer. He defended Churchill. He didn't defend Catherine Connolly.
I don't think he defended Churchill.
I don't want what I've just said to be lost by that, because I don't think that's important. But I'm just demonstrating I can debate those like all the other TVs and radio shows have all week as well. They're irrelevant. What's relevant
is that he was just there.
Is that he was there. And I hope now, and I understand why he had to be there. And I hope that now it's over and it's 362 days to the next one, right? I hope that somewhere in the diplomatic circle, somebody somewhere is thinking, how do we get an off-ramp to this?
Well, sorry, it's not going to be 360. Well, it'll be 362 days until he goes to the Oval Office. I think you can take it. It's pretty likely that Donald Trump will be here in Ireland in September.
At least it wasn't Conor McGregor this year.
No. But I think what's going to happen, you're going to find as well this year, is that everyone is looking at it, okay, will he go to Doonbeg for the Irish Open golf? And that's almost contained, in the sense that you can actually out and...
Yeah, because it's containable.
Well, it's contained in the sense that from a security point of view, it won't be an enormous
It's a private
risk.
visit almost.
Yeah, it's going to be more than that, I'm hearing. And the issue is going to be that he will want to come to Dublin. And apparently the issue is going to be just about 500 metres away from here is the site of where the new US embassy is going to be. And there is going to be a ceremony to sort of start the foundation building. And given his love of building, he wants to be at it.
And we'll have the EU presidency by then, won't we?
We will. So that means we will have to accommodate him in Dublin. And that means if he comes to Dublin as well as going to Clare, it means probably he'll have to go to Áras an Uachtaráin as well. And he's going to have to meet our president. Those are the possibilities that I'm told are under consideration inside in government circles, that it won't be possible just to contain him in Clare, that he will be in Dublin as well. What do you make of that, Larry?
Well, I can imagine that there will be a significant job of work involved for the Gardaí and others, because I would expect huge protests if that is the case.
It would be just a practice run for the Israeli football team, but in the stadium nearby a couple of weeks later.
It's a fair point. Look. I take Brendan's points on board, in the sense that, the war in Iran, which, I too vigorously oppose. I think it's one of the dumbest moves I've seen an American president make in recent times. But, Micheál Martin, and not to saying the same lines over again, Micheál Martin was there because the relationship between Ireland and the United States is bigger than Donald Trump. We might hold this guy, in contempt for lots of different reasons, but the Taoiseach is there because he had to be there. And I think it's a mistake to downplay some of the things that he did say. And I think he might have said it in his own ultra-diplomatic, perhaps subtle way, but he did defend Europe. He did push back on some of the things about immigration and this narrative that Europe is overrun by migrants. He did defend Keir Starmer and allies, and say that these are people who you have gotten along with in the past and you do have the capacity to get along with. He raised the issue of legal pathways for Irish people to the United States. So a lot was there in the mere 6 minutes that he got to speak. A lot was there, and I think by and large, most Irish people will say that he did a reasonable job under the circumstances. Of course, there are going to be critics, but the question I would ask them is, should he have raised this? Should he have raised that? Should he have been more powerful? Should he have been more forceful? And
should he have pointed out that our president is a woman?
And even to that point, I would ask the question, what possible good could any of that have done in that context? I'm not going to say Donald Trump would have exploded or it would have been a Zelensky moment. I think that stuff was really far-fetched, to be honest. I think, it's not in Trump's interest to pick a fight with Ireland, especially not around Patrick's Week.
Well, it struck me just on that Catherine Connolly thing, and I think particularly the Social Democrats seem very, very upset that he didn't reprimand and inform the president, and that President Trump didn't know this in the first place. But can you imagine if he had actually said, well, actually, our president is a woman, and then Trump would have said, well, what did she say? And how is he going to actually explain that?
Exactly. He only deepens the potential morass. If I would be critical of the Taoiseach, and I think this is a point that John Deasy made again this week and continues to make, and this is really important, because if we do believe that the relationship is bigger than just one person, we need to engage at a politician-to-politician level. And the fact that there doesn't seem to have been more engagement with high-profile members of Congress seems to me to be a real deficit. And that is something I think we need to put a lot of effort into in terms of the future of the relationship.
Yeah, but hold on, again, might there not have been, again, a certain degree of stage management is maybe the wrong word for it, but just being a little bit cautious on the basis that there are a lot of people on the Hill who don't like the Irish approach to Gaza. And if, now we see what the Israelis are doing. The Israelis are starting to treat Lebanon as if it's another Gaza. And not enough attention is being paid to that, because we're also caught up in what's happening in Iran, because that becomes directly relevant to us because of what it does to economics here in Ireland and throughout the rest of Europe and the rest of it. So if you have a situation whereby you are concerned about getting into rows about Israel up on the Hill, maybe just leaving things be quiet for a little while makes a bit of sense.
I'm not. I'm advocating for being risk averse in the Oval Office with Donald Trump. I'm not advocating for being totally risk averse. And crucial to the future of the relationship is going to be the idea that, look, America and Irish America are in a certain place. They've moved in a certain direction. This country has moved in a certain direction. Updating our understandings of one another is going to be absolutely crucial if we're going to maintain what we have. And central to that is political engagement. And look, my experience is that politicians get other politicians. And even where they disagree, they can have the frank backroom talks about, this is where we are and this is the real story as to where we're here. This is where we are and this is the real. And they can understand and get each other. That sort of engagement is absolutely crucial.
I saw John Deasy was critical in his piece for the Business Post of saying that Donald Trump didn't seem to have any idea of what Micheál Martin meant when he talked about greater visa and worker interaction between Ireland and the United States. I wouldn't have expected Trump to have any knowledge of that. And I just thought that even by putting that on the record in the White House would have been a sign to everybody else involved in the process, we're willing to actually do deals here to get more Irish workers into the United States and vice versa, because there are strict enough rules about Americans coming here, as you probably discovered at some stage yourself.
Well, no, I was very lucky.
You've got the Irish passport.
Red carpet all the way.
I often wonder on it, just as a quick aside, how would I be classed? Because I traveled into this country on an Irish passport. So how would I actually be classed as an immigrant or not? I don't know. But I would take a little bit, I agree with John on so much of what he says, but I actually had a very different take on how his mention of legal pathways for Irish citizens. I distinctly saw Donald Trump nodding at that. I didn't think he had no clue what he was talking about. And I do think, and I continue to think...
I think he nods when
just
he doesn't actually, when he doesn't understand what's
perhaps
going
to
on.
show
he's awake every so often.
But it's a lot better than just shaking his head.
It is.
And I do think that, look, it is incumbent, because I see these students every single day who want to go live the American dream for a short period of time or whatever. And I do think in terms of the future relationship, ensuring the transatlantic flow of people has to be a cornerstone to that.
Do you still see the students? Because my experience, and a lot of this through my own now adult children and all their friends, is that they're disengaging from America. They're no longer as interested in the United States as our generation would have been, who would have seen it as somewhere that they loved, somewhere they wanted to go to either work or to go for various holidays. To a large degree, they just look at America and go, nah.
I think that is probably a regional thing, and I'll put it to you this way.
Okay.
I think that the East Coast is probably a lot more disengaged from the United States, but given the familial ties that still are very, very strong between Galway in particular and my own home city, but the Western Seaboard and the East Coast, the Northeast of the United States, those ties are still very, very strong. So you'd have people looking to say, can I qualify as a lawyer in New York because I have relations who I can stay with and avoid rent and all that sort of thing. So those ties are still there, and as long as they are, if we're interested in the future of the relationship and maintaining it, there has to be room for the transatlantic flow of
but
people.
Larry, would you actually recommend to Irish people to even travel to the United States at present, given what ICE is getting up to, given that now all your social media records will be checked?
Never mind Irish people. I want to go, Larry. I want to go to the World Cup. Should I go?
Yes.
Well, I was getting there. I was actually getting there.
Yes, I still would. I mean, yes, you hear horror stories. Yes, this stuff should not be happening. Yes, this idea that the United States is the land of the First Amendment and free speech, yet it seemingly doesn't apply across the board. All of that stuff is deeply worrying. But again, from my own experience, and I would have gone over for the Galway football match last year with a crew, many of whom were very, very, they were worried about the things that they had said about Israel going over. We went over without issue. I have students who go over every summer. I have 4 students who are going to Boston this summer. We thought we'd have no applications. We had huge interest. These students are all delighted to be going. And just as the students did last year, my guess is, and my hope is, and my expectation is, they will go, they'll have a wonderful learning experience, and they'll come back saying, look, America is going through a difficult patch, a period of adjustment. Things are different, but it's still a good place.
If we beat Czechia next Thursday, and if then we beat Denmark the following Tuesday and qualify for the World Cup, would you go and see our game in the United States, the other 2 being in Mexico?
No, I'm poking Larry. I've told you this before. When I was last in America, Chicago in September 2020, well, it's 2024 now, just before the election.
You haven't told me this, but go on.
Okay,
Anyway.
I thought I had. Just before the election, I knew, it was just after the Democratic Congress was in Chicago. And I met some activists there. who weren't impressed by the way they were treated, Chicago activists, by the way they were treated at the Congress, by the Democrats, by the way. And I had a very...
So what sort of activists were they?
They were pro-Palestine activists.
Okay.
I sort of knew Trump was going to get elected. And I said on the plane coming home, we're not going back there if he gets elected. And I don't take any joy in that. I looked this up, by the way. I've been to 17 states.
That's good going for a communist like you, isn't it?
Well, it's 6 more than the average American has been to.
That's more than me, I was just going to say.
Yeah, it's 6 more than the average American has been to. I've enjoyed every single one of those trips. And I've met lovely, lovely people. The odd obnoxious sod, but you can meet them in Temple Bar any night too.
Or in the studio.
Hey, steady on, Larry, steady on.
Same. Right, we're not finished yet. No, I won't go back to the United States while Donald Trump is president. And I made that decision before because if he was re-elected, I wouldn't go back. I just can't do it. I can't give I just can't do it. So, but even if that wasn't my position, I do feel, given my views, given some of the things I've said on social media, just given what I'm reading, given what J.D. Vance says about what you have to do if you're going to go and having to provide the embassy with all of your pages and all of your this and all of your that, I wouldn't feel, first of all, I might not get in. Now, I think it's easier for Ireland because they kind of make that decision at Dublin Airport. And at least you have that security. If you're going to get sent home, you're only getting sent home from Dublin Airport.
Although if you'd booked your World Cup holiday, you'd be down a lot of money.
Yeah. So so no, I won't go. I won't go for that reason. And it's interesting to hear Larry saying what he's saying about that he doesn't think it's that. That's good to hear, by the way. But personally, I still wouldn't go.
Okay. And there's a few things. So what about though the fact, Brendan, that Micheál Martin did not call out the attack on Iran? And if anything, was quite soft in relation to it. Sort of, and he's been saying in a few things, terrible people in Iran, the way they've treated their own population. And a lot of that I'd be sympathetic to. And also saying, that they've been supporting Hezbollah and the rest of it. So not actually condemning what America and Israel is doing in Iran. What did you make of that?
Well, he didn't directly condemn it. And he did talk about the need for peace and the international order in a general sense.
And he started talking about Trump's contribution to that.
But I don't want to get boxed into this kind of Punch and Judy. Micheál Martin was either great or he was terrible. He was there, right? And if he was there, he was better than last year in a more difficult situation. And if he was going to speak up on some things, he probably spoke up on the things he should have spoken up on. The attack, off the charts attacks on Keir Starmer, and I'm not a fan of Keir Starmer, right? But off the charts attacks day after day at this stage. And given that Starmer was in Cork last week with Micheál Martin, that they're our nearest ally and all that stuff was going on, the Irish-British relationship and all that stuff. So he should absolutely have spoken up on that point, and he did. And he should absolutely have defended Europe against this nonsense.
That is somehow become unsafe
that
because of immigrants.
That we're a culturalist, dangerous, ravaged continent. Absolute nonsense. The way they talk, the way Trump and Vance talk about London it's unrecognisable to anybody that's ever been to London. So look at Micheál Martin's not Brendan Ogle. Should he have gone further? Of course he should have gone further. But I'm not here to knock him. I'm not here to put a medal on his breast either. I think the things he spoke up on, and the Catherine Connolly thing, just to say that, should he have corrected President Trump with Catherine Connolly's gender? Look at, and the fact that we even have a president. We're talking about a man who last weekend couldn't get his head around the fact that Keir Starmer had to consult with cabinet colleagues about going to war. So there's no point explaining to that man, if you're sitting there representing Ireland, by the way, there's a president over there who has a constitutional role, but it's not a political... No point even beginning that conversation.
I think you make an interesting point there about the messaging on Europe and the fact that so many in the MAGA circle believe that. I actually think in the current context, a lot of that negativity towards Starmer and towards Europe more broadly is targeted at a domestic political audience. I think that Trump knows that the MAGA movement is splintered over in disagreement, although most of them seem to be staying in his corner. They are splintered about the war on Iran. And one of the things that they will unite around is this idea that Europe is weak, that Europe is defenseless, that America carries water for Europe, and that Europe, when America needs a little bit of help, Europe won't even contribute that. And that is one thing that the MAGA people will say, yeah, you're right, Mr. President. So I think that is targeted at a domestic audience, even though it enrages a European audience.
Did it worry you a little bit that J.D. Vance suddenly has been so nice to Micheál Martin and the Irish delegation? Because I think he's so untrustworthy.
He was nice last year too. He wore shamrock socks last year.
Yeah, he was very. I mean, some of the words I thought were really kind of over the top. Like, we love Ireland, we admire you, all this sort of thing.
I just didn't see any sincerity in that at all.
No, it was really kind of taking him back. But speaking of that splintering, I mean, J.D. Vance's radio silence on Iran is absolutely extraordinary, which only illustrates, and he's been Trump's toady for a long time now, but the fact that he's not saying boo on this demonstrates the extent of his opposition to this war.
I want to come back after the break and I want to talk about the subsidies maybe for home heating and for electricity and gas and petrol and diesel and all the various economic issues that are going to impact on Ireland and things arising from that. But Brendan, I also know, given that we spoke in a recent Past the Power subscription edition about your many times in Cuba and your love of that country, I want to talk a little bit about that as well and what Ireland's position should be on that. And that goes beyond a kneecap flotilla as well to Cuba. That's all coming up when we come back after this break. Today's episode is brought to you by the Green Man Group. It's answering a critical question: how to invest in a sustainable future in real, tangible terms. Its answer lies in three areas: the energy transition, the places we live and shop, and the future of our food supply. The Green Man Group's strategy is to own and operate the physical infrastructure in these sectors, from solar energy generation and EV charging to agricultural projects and grocery-anchored real estate. By building, managing and optimising these areas via its investment and operational businesses, the group aims to build resilience and deliver long-term value. Explore its approach at thegreenman.group. Welcome back to Path to Power. We have Larry Donnelly and Brendan Ogle with us this week. And Brendan, just before we bring it all back to domestic politics, Cuba, it seems at the moment like, well, Trump has more or less said he expects Cuba almost to fall into his hands, that he'll be the king of Cuba very soon, or that it'll be the 51st state. Although at this thing, he's racking up so many 51st states.
It's competition to be the 51st state.
Yeah, 52nd, 53rd, 54th. But they almost seem to be regarding it almost as a done deal. Cuba is wrecked. Cuba is going to end up doing exactly what America tells it to do. And Trump will say, just like he's trying to claim, I'm ending 47 years of the Iranian war against America. What war? He's going to end up saying, well, I've saved America from the threat of Cuba. What threat?
Well, since we spoke the last time, I'm going to come on to something Larry said before the break there about Vance, but I'm going to make it about Rubio. Because it's possible the same dynamic is playing out in the Cuban sphere. But just before I do that, I was speaking to, as you know, I have some friends in Cuba and touching base with them. And since I last spoke to you about this, probably about a month or so ago, the situation has got a lot worse. And I won't say there's starvation, I'm not saying that, but there is hunger. And there's hunger because of the energy strangulation. The summer started to come now. It's very warm in Cuba in the summer, and it's, spring here is a warmer spring there. And refrigeration, the people I know are in Havana, so they're not in the countryside where you can just maybe go and pick something off a tree or something. So the blackouts are 16, 17, 18 hours a day. Very hard to store food and keep food healthy and refrigerated in that circumstance. And there is absolutely no doubt that Cuba is being strangled. Now, it's been strangled economically since 1962, by the way. But in terms of its energy, we're probably in the final phase, unless something happens. We'll come to that, of strangulation. And I think there are talks taking place between the Cuban administration and the Americans, and Trump is making comments about a friendly takeover. But there are contacts taking place there. There always have been anyway. People think that there is an American, I don't call it an embassy, but there's a huge American building in the centre of Havana, and there always has been. So those contacts are ongoing all the time. But there is a ship on its way to Cuba.
Not the one that Kneecap are travelling on, no?
No.
Flotilla.
Well, unless the one that Kneecap are travelling on has 730,000 barrels of oil, no. It's coming from Russia. And it got a single one-off licence directly from Trump last week. So it's about halfway to Cuba. And what I find interesting, given what Larry said about J.D. Vance, is Rubio is very, very quiet on this. Now, Rubio has a specific interest in Cuba, and it's a little bit sick, I think, all this horror story about poor old Rubio's parents were thrown out of Cuba by the evil Castro's nonsense. Rubio's parents left Cuba before Castro came to power, by the way. So that's about a month's oil.
Hold on a second.
Cuba.
Are you saying a humanitarian, shall we say?
I'm not calling it a humanitarian.
No,
it's one of the Russian shadow fleet.
Yeah, I'm putting this in inverted commas, Brendan, right? Because so the Americans stop the Venezuelans from supplying Cuba, as Venezuela have been doing, causing enormous damage to Cuba, great human suffering, and then decides, well, actually, you can have some oil, but it comes from an embargoed Russian source.
Yes. They've given a one-off license. Trump himself has given a one-off license to this ship. Well, it's one-off for now. But I've seen comments, and last week we heard about, in terms of the Iranian conflict, Iranian war, we heard about, that there was loose things about Cuba, and Zelensky, quite rightly, by the way, had issues with this from the Ukrainian point of view, and giving some latitude to Russia, and Russia could gain and all that. And Zelensky was right about that, so don't let anything I'm saying about Cuba diminish my support for Ukraine. But so I'm complex, I suppose. But
we know that, Brendan. We know that.
But this anyway. Trump gave a license to this ship. I nearly can think of the name, the Anatoly something or other. It's an embargoed ship. It's a Russian ship. It's part of the Shadow Fleet, and it has 730 barrels of oil on board. And it's heading to Havana. And it will provide Cuba with 3 to 4 weeks of the oil they need. That's all. So what happens in that 3 to 4 weeks? Is it a one-off? First of all, it could still be intercepted by the American Navy. There's nothing to say it won't. Trump can change his mind every 5 minutes, right? So the big question at the moment is, does that ship make it to Havana? That's a big question.
Yeah, it certainly is. I'm desperate to zoom out just for a sec, because I want to ask you one question, Brendan, as somebody who is so culturally fluent, I suppose, in Cuba, knows the place as well as you do. And it's in the context of the embargo, which you mentioned going back so long, and Cuban-American relations. We, of course, in the United States are fed a certain diet from childhood about Cuba, about all of its evils and everything else. But the one thing I'd like to get your perspective on is, why is it that older Cuban Americans, now I know younger Cuban Americans have a somewhat different perspective, why is it that older Cuban Americans are the ones who were most in favor of the embargo, most in favor of the really strong sanctions from the United States against Cuba, most influential in the Republican Party in the state of Florida, for instance, when the reality is it could be their relations, their loved ones, etc., who had stood an awful lot to lose? What do you attribute that to?
It's very hard for me to understand it, and I've tried to understand that many times, Larry. There was one time there, I forget what year it was, maybe about 15 years ago, I went and did one of my visits to Cuba, and 4 weeks later I went to Miami. Shouldn't have done that, by the way. I was probably breaking some law in doing that. And then I went to Calle Ocho in Miami, where the Cuban, it's little Cuba, it's little Havana. And I went to the Domino Park there. And I sat down and I discussed. I remember one particular old guy who had left Cuba as a child. And I discussed it. And I said, well, what is your problem? And he was telling me about the Castros and the communists and how they repress people and beat them in the street and all that. And I said, well, I was just there. And I took out my phone. I started showing him pictures. I was just there 4 weeks ago. And I smoked at the time. I was smoking a cigar. I said, that's a real Cuban cigar. And I give him one. Because there were lots of cigar shops selling Dominican cigars or Cuban cigars, all that stuff going on, right? And he was so filled with hatred that he didn't live through this. He was a child who left Cuba with his parents. And what he was describing to me, and I spoke to other people too, but I remember he stuck in my mind now because he was a nice man. But we just reached a situation where the conversation couldn't continue. He just couldn't get his head around. I said, I'm just there. I said, and to be honest with you, if you ask me, can I spend my night in Miami? Can I spend my night in Havana? I prefer to spend my night in Havana. And that's with the blockade, right? So...
So the way you described that, and given the question that Larry asked you,
I'm sorry if I didn't really answer the question.
But I think you did in a certain way in that if people have myths about their home place. So if everybody who's left maybe a generation ago or 2 generations ago has this horror story about leaving and what it was like, why they had to leave, then the younger generations hear these stories or they sort of exaggerate them perhaps, and that's why they believe, oh, that's a terrible place. Granddad or dad had to leave that because repression, beating them on the streets, blah, blah, blah. We need to change that. At least here in America, we have freedom.
But it's also more complicated because I know someone else then. And I knew this person. She's a woman. And she was a friend of my friend who was talking on the phone the other day. And she was in Havana when I knew her, and her family and her dad and all that. Actually, not Havana, Vinales, a beautiful town. And you know, she was very Cuban and very proud of her country and the whole lot. And then I said to my friend on the phone there one of the times, I says, well, where is Dana now? And she's living in Miami. I was really shocked. Now I knew she had a sister in Miami, but now she's moved and she's living with her sister in Miami. And so it's very complicated. And I've sat down with young people in Havana. I've sat in Havana maybe with a little bit of rum in the street, and people walk past and they tell me that they want to go to America. And I said, well, I've just been to America. And again, I took out my phone. And I said, it's not all, gold and champagne. There's poverty in America too. You need a lot of money in America. You've got better health care here. You've got better education system here. This is maybe 10, 15 years ago I'd be having these conversations. But there was this impulse. And then, of course, when Obama came in, and I'm trying to answer your question as fully as I can, Larry, when Obama came in, things changed. Right? I had never seen Americans really in Cuba. I'd met a few trade unionists, right? But ordinary, we call them ordinary Americans, because American trade unionists aren't ordinary. But suddenly Obama came in, right? And he made some changes. So now the cruise ships can come to Havana. So suddenly old Havana is flooded with, maybe just for a few hours perhaps, but it's flooded with a couple of thousand Americans. And I was really interested to see how the Cubans going to react to this. Well, and I don't just mean the business people who obviously would welcome it. I mean the ordinary Cubans. Well, they loved it. Suddenly taxis had got the Cuban flag and the American flag in the front of the taxis in the dashboard. There was American flags popping up here and there. There was nobody ripping them down. There was nobody being antagonistic. The Americans coming in liked it. They were nice. I didn't see anything going wrong. Crime rates didn't go up. Drug rates didn't go up. And you don't have to worry about those too much in Cuba, by the way. They didn't go up because of this tourism, and the Cubans welcomed it. It was a win-win situation. They were called cultural excursions and all that sort of stuff that happened first. And
sorry, the word excursion has to be used very carefully now after the day Donald Trump's been using it.
Yeah, indeed. But I think you've got politicians poisoning all of this. I think left, and I know there is bitterness in South Florida. Look, I suppose the best way I can explain it, Matt, is, or Larry, is I'm from Dundalk, right? I grew up in Dundalk in the 80s, right? I was taught at my father's knee to hate the Brits, right? I was taught that. I used to see a Union Jack. I used to see a Union Jack and I nearly wanted to vomit, right? Or hit someone, right? Now that's long gone out of me, right? I have many, many British friends. I love I love going to Britain. I have many British friends. I work for a British union, a British and Irish union, but it's mostly a British union. That's long gone out of me. But I can still remember that. And I think, so I understand that. I think there's a lot of that goes on in South Florida. I think there's a lot of lack of understanding. But somewhere you have families intermingling between Cuba and South Florida. It's only 90 miles, 87 miles, I think. And they're sending goods, they're sending money. And, but Trump and Rubio, Trump says he wants to strangle Cuba and take it over. I wonder what Putin has to say about that. And I despise Putin, Matt, you know that. But I wonder what Putin has to say about that. And I wonder what this ship is about. And I wonder, is there going to be more? And I wonder what Rubio thinks of all of this.
Okay, let's come back to Ireland and let's talk about what might happen next Tuesday at the Cabinet meeting. Because the government is under pressure in relation to the rising cost of home heating oil, petrol and diesel. Electricity and gas prices haven't gone up as yet, but I think that's only as yet because the various companies are hedged in relation to this. But later on in the year, we will see the prices increase. We also see the potential for further price increases because of shortage of fertiliser. The increase in price in fertiliser means food prices are likely to go up. Certain foods won't be able to be imported. I think those would have come through the Strait of Hormuz. And we've been learning, and as I talked to Dan O'Brien about on the subscription podcast, we've been learning about the importance of things like sulphur and helium, as it happens, for the manufacture of essential items as well, all getting caught up in the Strait of Hormuz. So what does the government do on Tuesday? Does it bend to the opposition demands for the reintroduction of things like cost of living measures, energy credits maybe, or should it just restrict itself for the moment to reducing the excise duties and carbon taxes on a litre of petrol and diesel and give everybody who has to drive to work at least some leeway at a time when the government takes an extra 6 cent out of every 10 cent increase in the price of a litre?
Yeah, well, I think the government was minded and remains minded to be cautious. I actually found things moved very, very quickly on this front in the past week or so. I thought the government was very reticent to do anything, and the posture was very much, let's wait and see. This might end sooner rather than later. We might have to go down this road. I think, as you say, the political pressure has gone to such a point that they have no choice on Tuesday but to act in some fashion. My thinking is that they will try to be as cautious. I think excise tax is probably where they'll move on home heating allowance. I suspect there'll be some movement there. But in terms of the carbon tax, I mean, they've made it very clear that that's sort of a Rubicon, a line that they're not willing to go across. Whether they will or not, that will be a fairly significant capitulation, I think, in the grand scheme of things to the demands made by the opposition. But there's no question the domestic political pressure here is growing. And don't forget that the prices have gone very high. There's no doubt about that. They've flown up. Trump says they'll drop like a hammer. That remains to be seen. But this comes in a context, and I know lots of the economic figures here are really good. This comes in a context in which an awful lot of people in this country are already to the pin of their collar. And these price increases, especially on the price of petrol, people who need to get to work, they cannot bear them. And if we get to a stage where this continues on, then it's going to get into a really horrible situation. How long it goes, I don't know, but the one signal I have is that the fact that the government has moved from its recalcitrance suggests strongly to me that they think that this is going to go on for a while. And even if it ends one way or the other, the prices will stay high for a significant period of time.
A couple of things. I think they have to be seen to get out in front of things rather than being seen to react to the opposition on it. But again, and this is something I put to Dan for the subscription edition, you can talk about inflation not, again, reaching the levels that it did during the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The problem is that prices went up dramatically then and they never fell back. And you can argue, okay, the price of electricity and gas did come back a bit and various, but overall level of prices are much, much higher. And for an awful lot of people, actually, Brendan, you're probably better placed on this given your trade union involvement. For a lot of workers, I think some people did get pay increases that more than compensated for this. a lot of people didn't. An awful lot of workers are actually probably worse off than they were 3, 4, 5 years ago. And they also found that in the last budget that the government brought in last October, there were no tax measures. And basically, Paschal Donohoe, in his last budget as Minister for Finance, told people, go and negotiate with your employers for a pay rise to keep up with the cost of living.
Well, and I also know a little bit about energy. Because I worked in that area for quite a little bit of time, and Trump says that the prices will fall like a stone, I think was his phrase. Trump's not in Ireland. There's 3 things we know about Irish energy companies. 3 things we know. First of all, when something like this happens, a shock to the system, they will put up prices quicker than they need to. The second thing we know is
they'll bring them down slower.
They'll put them up more than they need to. And the third thing we know is they'll bring them down slower and less than they need to. They're the 3 things we know. Nothing Donald Trump says changes that.
And does that even apply to the state-owned ESB?
Absolutely it does, because it's part of the same they call it regulated upwards. We got the highest prices in peer countries in the EU before this happened. I remember when I went into energy and ESB before, when ESB was called a monopoly. What a horror! We had the lowest energy prices in Europe. Then we had the sainted competition. Now we've got the highest. So competition's doing great for the Irish consumer in the area of energy. They're just facts. Anybody can disagree. Get Dan O'Brien to disagree with that if you want. He won't. He can't. So where we are now is the government may be trying to weigh up time-wise. How long is this war going to last? Can we hold on another week before we make these decisions on excises or on VAT or on the greens or on the carbon taxes? They may be. I would say to the Irish government, if that's your calculus, because of the 3 things I've just outlined, quicker, more and slower, forget that analysis. No matter what happens in Iran, if they stop today, the Irish energy companies won't stop today.
Well, also because the interruption to supplies and the damage that's been done.
No, there is genuine.
There
is genuine. Even if they stop today, there'll be genuine thing. So what are they going to do? I think they need to. You framed it in the context: are they going to yield to the opposition? I think that's and you're right to phrase it like that, by the way. But I think that's really narrow-sighted policy making by the government to be seen to be doing it in that way. They should be taking ownership of this.
Yeah, but you see, they've started this thing going back to last year, that no more one-off payments and no more sort of out-of-budgetary cycle increases. Now, my argument on that is that you always, in any budgeting situation, if you're a company, even in your household, you have a contingency fund for emergencies.
If you're lucky.
Yeah, well,
you try to.
But you try to. But if you're a government which is actually having such excesses and which is having surpluses every year, and yes, they say we are putting money away into long-term savings, that's great. You also have to have money to put away into contingencies.
Right, and you're right, people are suffering now. They're suffering before.
300,000 people or households are still in arrears from previously, because the point is, and it's to your point, that yes, the increases, some of them receded, but it didn't come back. The prices didn't come back to the levels they were at. I just have to look at, unfortunately, I'm in a position where I can pay my electricity and my gas bills, but I know that they permanently became much higher than they had 5 years ago.
They're at the level of childcare for people now. The energy bill used to be a bill. I'm not saying a negligible bill. It was gone too high a long time ago, but it was a bill. Now it's a major expense for the average working household. It's a major expense now. And the profits, by the way, of these companies are going through the roof. So, ESB's profits are through the roof. And isn't
that to the benefit of the workers in ESB?
Don't bring it back to that, Matt. No, not to the extent that the profits are. No,
no.
And the workers in ESB deserve every penny they get.
They're shareholders.
That's not
as well,
why.
aren't they?
It's 5% shareholders.
Yeah.
That's
you
not.
negotiated that.
That's
didn't
not.
you?
No, I didn't. You can't blame me for that one.
You'd have got 15 or 50%.
You can blame a fella called Joe Lacombe. I can blame him for that one. I hope you're listening, Joe.
He is a friend of yours, isn't he?
Well, yeah. He'll wear that as a badge of honour, put it to you that way.
Right, okay.
But we're talking about fuel prices, and there's a headline in the Independent today saying that electricity prices are going to go up hundreds. I know we're laughing there.
I think the average bill is expected to go up 800
euros, the number. Yeah, which is extraordinary, again, with so many people being pushed to the pin of their collar. And not to be in appalling Vista territory, but if you look at the realities in terms of what all this fuel issue, what the fuel issues are going to do, and the knock-on effects they're going to have for the costs of goods and services that need to get through the Strait of Hormuz, we're looking at a very, very dangerous situation, and again, an appalling vista. And it brings back this thing that this is Trump's war that Europe and the whole world, directly and indirectly, are going to wind up paying for in lots of different respects. So that's why, and the American people are not immune to this either. I mean, the price of petrol has already gone up significantly. They're 80 cents a gallon on average and climbing. So at every level, this war was ill-conceived and is not going to serve any beneficial purpose for the United States or the world more broadly.
I just thought of something, Brendan. And this came up in a debate that I had with John Gibbons, who does my environment spot on The Last Word. And we were talking about how it's potentially something that's already started, which may be accelerated, which is pulling back on the green agenda, particularly in relation to energy and all of those things. So this was something that I brought up with him last night as to whether, we've been so far behind in actually doing what we needed to do in relation to green energy. We have put in extra wind farm capacity on land. We have failed offshore incredibly. But then there is the issue that for all of the additional capacity that we have brought on, an awful lot of it goes to data centres. Now, there is an argument that we have to have the data centres or else we won't have all of the American companies in Ireland, in tech and various other things. Hear me out. And we won't get new investment unless they're able to have process their data in the data centres. And these are the companies that are paying billions in corporation tax revenues. But an idea struck me. I want to see what you think in relation to this. It became clear recently, I think it was Lynn Boylan with Sinn Féin did some freedom of information requests and was able to ascertain the deep discounts that a lot of these data centres are getting because they're buying electricity in bulk. So essentially they're paying a unit rate which is about half of what you or I or anyone listening is paying in their homes. So should it be that maybe what the government should do is saying is, well, if we're going to have data centres and if we're going to have more of them, there should be no more deep discounts available to bulk supplier or bulk purchasers of energy. They should pay the same as everybody else. So even if it doubles their bills, that's what they should be paying if they are going to be drawing on the energy grid.
Well, what you describe as as a discount to the data centres, I describe as a subsidy from households to big business. And Lynn also outlined in that freedom of information request that up to 50%. Think about that for a minute now. Up to 50% of the energy of this little country, 5.5 million people, not economically that secure if you take the FDI and all those tax receipts away, is going to data centres.
No, it's 22%.
Okay, I thought you said...
No, it's 22%.
Okay,
Let's get it
correct. We'll go back to that. Okay, still incredible, but we'll go back to that. So in that case then, I don't understand, because you said that the multinationals won't come here, or people will say the multinationals won't come here. Data doesn't have to be in Ireland. Data gets transferred all across the world. They don't have to be here. The data centres
it isn't in a cloud. It does actually have to be in physical infrastructure. And there is an argument as well from an environment point of view that Ireland is one of the best locations because of our temperate climate to actually host these facilities, that you use less power than you would be to cool the facilities if we're in warmer climes, for example.
I've heard it all now. Our climate.
Yeah.
Our temperate climate.
Yes, is a help.
We had 5 weeks of rain there, by the way.
Yeah.
Right. Is a help to data centres. How?
Because they don't need as much cooling as they would in warmer climates.
Well, build them in Greenland then.
Well, I think that might have been part of the ambition for America taking over
or Iceland,
Greenland.
or what they call it now? What are they calling it now? The High North.
But you also need proximity to those companies which are using
At
the
the same
information.
time, there's a microclimate in Manchester. It never stops raining in
And
Manchester.
they're building data centres over there as well.
Listen, this is bizarre. We're in a conversation here now, and Larry is describing it very well. If this war continues for another month, and the amount of bombing on gas and oil reserves continues, this issue in terms of the cost of fuel and energy will become a bigger issue for this government than housing, than healthcare, than tax, it'll become the biggest issue.
Come back.
Right?
So I say a discount, which is what the
We need to
commercial
stop
term is.
building
You
data
say
centres.
subsidy. Hold on a second. For the existing data centres, would it not be a starting point to say they pay exactly the same price as
No,
everybody
they pay
else?
twice as much.
Larry, this is something that the US ambassador
Why do you laugh at
has
that,
brought
Matt?
up.
Yes, he's saying
At what?
At the idea that multinational, tax avoidant companies who are funded by data centres, and those data centres themselves would pay a higher proportion of tax than a struggling household.
I'm laughing the way you put it. The only thing, what I will say to you in relation to that is that I'm suggesting something to actually make sure that an unfairness goes away. You know, if you jump to the other extreme,
I'm taking your suggestion and doubling it.
And doubling it. Fair enough. The American ambassador, who's Trump's golfing buddy, recently was in, and this is according to information that the Irish Times has, again through FOI, getting briefings from the Department of Finance. And a couple of things that came up very interesting in it was he was saying Ireland is losing future foreign direct investment because of the data centre issue. And also, it seems, and this came up in Washington during the week as well, he's putting the pressure on as well that we have to have the LNG facilities to buy American liquefied natural gas.
Yeah, well, Trump pushed very hard, I think, on that, in turn, especially in the Shamrock ceremony, saying, this deficit in trade we have, that we need to buy some. And there is an argument that our reserves are terrible, and that there's an argument that that's in violation of EU directives on the topic. So that's something I think we do need to look into. I don't think it's going to make up the $42 billion deficit, but I think a step in that direction could be useful. On the data center issue, I take a lot of what Brendan says. I mean, at a deep level, I and I think many other people would object to the idea of households, whether you call it a subsidy or whatever you want to call it, paying more for electricity than these huge multinationals. But at the same time, it's that old balance. I mean, we talk about what Ed Walsh has said, and indeed it's from his contacts. He does have a lot of contacts in the higher echelons of these U.S. multinationals, that this could be a problem.
He could be bluffing as well, though.
He could well. Yeah, again, that's, he's here to represent American interests, so that's a part of his job, so there could be something to that. But, you have warring suggestions here between the two of you. I'd suggest something more.
So we're not warring. While we're both suggesting putting up the price of electricity supply to the data centres. We're actually... Exactly.
And I would have sort of a Solomonic solution, that we reach some sort of halfway point where they do pay more for their electricity.
Still not as much as we're saying.
But it's still, no, because again, we need to balance the realities on the ground and in terms of the economy. And the one thing I always hold accountable people on the left for is they always talk about the economy and big tech and all these sorts of things. At the end of the day, those are families, those are jobs, those are mortgages, those are real people who are dependent on those things for their very livelihoods. So the government has to balance all of those things. And of course, the one tragedy in all of this, and the war has probably brought this to the fore, is the climate issue. And where does all of that fit in this? Because the climate issue is the existential issue. There's no question about it. But
there is, as far as Trump and his administration are concerned. And many people say these are just weather cycles.
Well,
all of this nonsense is green nonsense. Is the ultimate
Was it drill,
woke
baby,
stuff.
drill?
Yeah.
I mean, look, that's a patent nonsense. But, we do have to be mindful of it. But here's where I and lots of other people are torn, is that we do have, in the very immediate term, we have needs. And these needs, as Brendan says, are only going to heighten for working class people as things get worse and this war continues.
Actually, do you know what else is subsidised? Is aviation fuel. aviation fuel is taxed at a much lower level than the kerosene that's used for home heating in people's houses. And it continues to be as a subsidy, a subvention to get people to fly. So we're in a situation where it's the American airlines who have been putting enormous pressure on our government as well to open up Dublin Airport to increase the amount of traffic going through. But I wonder, would the traffic actually be anything like it is if the airlines were actually charged the economic rate for their kerosene?
Probably not. But look, again, you get down to basic individuals, and people have gotten used to being able to travel around the world for cheap. And there are reasons why it has to be done, of course, holidays and that sort of thing. But more importantly, there are the business and commercial ties. And there is the reality that we are an island. We need people to have access to this place for all sorts of reasons. And that's what our economy is dependent upon.
Well, I've been watching this debate taking place. It's about 16 years ago now, since a friend of mine, then a director of ESB, was made the director of sustainability. When Al Gore's movie came out, when was that? An Inconvenient Truth, is that what it was called?
Yes.
Yeah. So when that came out, ESB appointed a director for sustainability. So that's going back quite some time now.
Yeah.
And the island status, Larry, is a big advantage. You know, we're surrounded by seas, 4 or 5 times our landmass. And we've got quite a bit of wind. So Ireland should be an ideal location for both onshore and offshore renewables. And so I'm going back there maybe 15, 16, 17 years. And and I know they'll say it's gone up. First of all, onshore wind is unreliable. So every megawatt of onshore wind needs to be matched by a megawatt of until they develop some storage, by a megawatt of carbon fueled energy for the moment the wind doesn't blow. Okay? But offshore is much, much more reliable. And as you outlined at the beginning of this segment, Matt, we have not seen, given the amount of seas we have not seen the investment that we could be making. And I'm not just talking about...
We haven't had new offshore wind since 2004.
That is a gross... Negligence of government.
Yes.
Of government. Now...
And civil service and regulators.
Because government work... It's even more so, because government, we know, work to an electoral cycle of 4 to 5 years. And all they really seem to care about these days, and I don't know if it was always like this, but in the last few years anyway, all they really seem to care about is the next electoral cycle.
It's always
right. Come on, Brendan.
That's not
that's
not long enough to address an existential crisis such as this. Yeah. Okay? So we need some body, some cross-party body, some civil service managed by the civil service. We need something generational to develop that resource and to do it through public money, not just farm it out to the private sector who'll only do it if they make more money. That's the debate we just had with the data centres. We need the state to use the seas that we have. We're very, very lucky. It's one of our natural resources. The amount of seawater that we have and winds that we have. And we're just letting it go.
You see, you say we need the state to do it, but the state is inert in actually doing anything. The late Eddie O'Connor had all sorts of brilliant ideas.
Remember him.
And he's a guy who was actually very worker-friendly, but...
Didn't know he passed.
A couple of years ago now, he passed quite suddenly. And he was a guy who still had brilliant ideas. He had a big idea for an underwater grid, effectively connecting all of Europe for storing energy, so that when the sun shone in Europe, we'd use that. When the sun wasn't shining,
Electricity, wasn't it?
He went Electricity, founded then. He was in other businesses as well. Absolutely brilliant individual. But at one stage, not long before he died, he told me about this. He went into government and he pitched the idea for this supernode, as he called it. And he was told, when can you have that ready? And he said about a 10-year cycle. Oh, that's no use to me. There'll be elections before that.
Desperate.
That was
desperate.
Just one other thing while we're there, we're talking about the kerosene. You live up in Swords, don't you? So were you not in with all of the protesters this week at the Oireachtas committee about the increased numbers that'll be going through Dublin Airport? The damage that's doing in air pollution and to health to people in Swords and other areas in North Dublin. Were you not amongst them?
No.
Why not?
Is there any other questions?
Why wouldn't you be? Why wouldn't you be supportive of them?
Well, I have some serious issues in my life, as you know, and It hasn't hit my radar. I live close to Dublin Airport. If living close...
You're not on the flight path, so are you?
Well, I don't know if I'm on a flight pad. I see the planes from where I live.
Can you hear them?
Depending on what way the wind is blowing, I can hear them. They have never annoyed me. I'm not as close to some people, but I'm close enough. If that annoyed me, I wouldn't live close to an airport.
But it's just not easy to get up and go, is it? And the issue is that the number of in-flights just keeps increasing. And it seems that they were told initially when the planning permission came in for the second runway, the aircraft had to head 5 miles in a certain direction and then turn, but they seem to be turning and going lower earlier, that there's no enforcement of the rules in relation to this, and this is unfair on the people living in the airport proximity.
I support people's right to protest.
I know you do. You've organised enough of them.
I have, not this one.
Not this one.
I haven't organised this protest.
No, but do you not support this one?
I haven't been at it and I haven't organised it.
He's been political in that answer, Larry, isn't he?
No, I mean, I think that they have a right to seek mitigation efforts. I wouldn't be so crass to say, as a lot of people in this country would say, they knew they were buying houses next to an airport, and that's the way it goes. And the societal need or the country's need needs to trump their individual needs. So, but I do think that they have the right fully to seek mitigation. And I'm somebody who grew up near enough to Logan Airport in Boston with a flight path right over our head and the expressway in my backyard. And one of the things I always used to say to my dad, because he complained, I said, well, you shouldn't have bought the house where you bought the house if you don't like it.
I'm sure he loved you for telling him that, did he?
And did he tell you were being crass, Larry?
He did. And he told me that's what I could afford and that's how you're going to college.
Okay, lads, thank you very much. Brendan Ogle and Larry Donnelly, thank you very much for being with us. As I've said, the subscription edition this weekend has Dan O'Brien, and he's done a really fascinating discussion about the economics of the Iranian assault by the Americans and by the Israelis and what it's going to mean for all of us over the next year and beyond. If you've been interested in what we've been talking about today, I think you'll really like what Dan O'Brien had to say as well. You can subscribe in all the usual places wherever it is you get your podcast. So until the next time, from me, Matt Cooper, thank you for being with us.